Hello YouTube, and welcome to the next route learning video. On today's video we're going to be taking a journey along the Just Trains Newcastle to Edinburgh section of the East Coast Main Line, and I'm going to be driving a Class 91 between Newcastle and Edinburgh station, which at a distance of just under 125 miles makes this the longest distance yet covered in a video on this channel. Along the way we will be calling at Alnmouth, Berwick-upon-Tweed, Dunbar and finally Edinburgh. The scenario that I'm using for this video is one which I've custom created, and we will be following the real-life timetable of train 1 Sierra 02, which is the 6:15 AM Doncaster to Edinburgh service. The reason why I've chosen this specific service is because it's the only northbound Virgin Trains East Coast service each day to call at more than one intermediate station between Newcastle and Edinburgh Waverley. Our attraction for the journey today is a Class 91 electric locomotive hauling a rake of 9 Mark IV coaches with a Mark IV DVT on the rear. The Class 91 that I'm using is actually painted in a special commemorative livery to commemorate the memory of those soldiers who died during World War I, and this livery has been named For the Fallen, which is also the name of the locomotive itself. The reskin for the locomotive and the train actually comes from BH Reskins, which you can find on Facebook, and I'm going to pop the link to the BH Reskins page in the description of this video. So the Class 91 is an electric locomotive built by Brel Crew Works between 1988 and 1991, with a total of 31 of these locomotives produced. The length of each locomotive is 63.5 feet, and the weight of each locomotive is 81.5 tons. They run on the 25 kilovolt AC overhead electrification system and have a maximum in-service speed of 125 miles per hour, though they were originally designed to run at up to 140 miles per hour, and on a special test run shortly after the locomotive started to be built, they actually managed to get one of these locomotives up to a record speed of 162 miles per hour. The power output of each locomotive is 6,480 horsepower, with a maximum tractive effort of 190 kilonewtons, which is 43,000 pounds of force. The train uses a mixture of rheostatic and disc air braking. So the rheostatic braking is just another name for dynamic braking, effectively, though that's not simulated properly in this model in Train Simulator. Once in the cab of the Class 91, the first thing that I need to do is adjust the reversing handle and initially put it into the forward position before then moving it back to the centre position, as when you're stopped in a Class 91 you should always move it back to the centre position, which switches off the fans and also prevents the driver safety device from going off when the train isn't moving. So if I now move the reversing handle forward, just heard the AWS self-test sequence go off there, and now the fans of the locomotive have come on, and as you can probably hear, they're actually quite loud on this loco. So I now need to move that back to the centre position, and now you'll hear that the fans start powering off, and ultimately the loco becomes very quiet indeed. Now to go through some of the controls here. So first of all we have the horn there, which is controlled with the spacebar and the B key. And then just to the left of that, just here, we have the throttle control, which has a smooth operation, so there's no notches on the throttle on this locomotive. You can just gradually increase the power handle and gradually decrease it again, though for the most part we're going to be using the speed set on this journey. In front of us here we have the speedometer, and we also have the brake pipe gauge there. So the speedometer is of course measured in miles per hour, and you can see there is a red line by 125 miles per hour, indicating that that is our maximum permitted speed. The little triangle you can see on the outside of the speedometer there is the speed set. However, you can't actually move these speed sets until you're actually moving the train. So once the train is moving, I will then adjust the speed set by increasing it with the Y key and decreasing it with the C key. Though I must also point out with the speed set on this particular locomotive that as we get to higher speeds, you actually need to set it for higher than the speed you intend to travel at, because the speedometer, it just will not go to the speed that the speed set is set to. So for example, if you want to do around 125 miles per hour, you need to put the speed set at between 130 and 135 to maintain a speed of around 125. Now over here you can see that we've got the main brake gauges. It's the top gauge that we're really interested in, which show you how hard the brakes are applied, and generally I will try and not go above the 4, which is the position you can now see on the brake gauge there when applying the brakes. If we now look down here, you can see the brake handle there. There are actually 6 steps of brake and then an emergency setting on this locomotive. And now we just have a series of switches over on the left hand side of the cab. The only one that I really need to worry about here is turning on the instrument lights, and as you can see now, that just makes the instruments brighter, and so they're much easier to read than they would be otherwise. Of course, that's particularly useful at night, otherwise you really can't see the instruments at all. So now that we've had a quick look around the cab, we're pretty much ready to depart towards Edinburgh. Just going to pan to a couple of more external shots of the train, and then we'll head out towards Edinburgh Station. Departing Newcastle, the starting speed limit is 20 miles per hour, and we've got around 35 miles to go to our first stop, which is Almouth. You may have noticed just as I was starting here, I actually applied power before I fully released the brakes, and that's just to enable a more smooth start off. In fact, when I've travelled on Class 91 sets in real life, the start off is often so smooth that you don't actually know that the train has started moving unless you look outside the window. I've also currently increased the speed set to 20 miles per hour, which at these lower speeds the speed set is actually accurate and will hold us at the correct speed. You may have noticed there we've just passed a 40 mile per hour speed board, and I can accelerate up towards 40 miles per hour once we pass the next signal. We're now passing the next signal, so I'm increasing the speed set to 40 miles per hour, and I'm also now going to increase the power so that we have a higher rate of acceleration up towards 40. The next speed change is shortly after passing through the next station, with an increase in the speed limit up to 85 miles per hour. We're now passing Manners Station. The speed limit here is now going up to 85 miles per hour, and I can accelerate up towards 85 as we pass under the next overbridge you can see just coming up. Now we've reached the overbridge, I'm going to increase the speed set, but I'm actually going to increase it beyond 85 miles per hour, as the speed limit will shortly be going up to 100 miles per hour, and there's no way we can even reach 85 before the speed limit increases. So as I'm aiming for a speed of 100 miles per hour, I've set the speed set currently at 105, slightly higher than 100, just to maintain us at around 100. We're now passing the 100 mile per hour speed board, and I would also just like to take this opportunity to apologise in advance if we experience any lag on this journey. Unfortunately, this route is quite demanding even for powerful PC systems, and it can bring many systems to their knees, so there will be some lag on this journey, which is completely unavoidable, just some patches of lag and possibly some freezes for a second or two, which I just can't do anything about. We're now passing Heaton Depot on the right hand side. The next speed change that I'm looking out for is an increase in the speed limit to 110 miles per hour, and the speed limit will be increasing shortly after we've crossed the junction, where a line diverges off to the right. We've just reached the junction now with the line diverging off to the right just here, and so just in a moment we will be passing the 110 speed board, and at that point I will then increase the speed set to 115, so just past the 110 speed board now, and I've increased the speed set to 115, which will hold us at a speed of around 109 miles per hour. I've actually wanted to make a video on this route for about a year now, since the route was first released on Christmas Eve last year. However, unfortunately, due to some stability issues with this route, it used to just constantly crash out in the scenario editor on my old PC. So I'm glad that I finally managed to construct this scenario on my new PC. However, I have still experienced some stability issues, so this video is the video that almost didn't happen, simply because it constantly seemed to want to crash out when I was trying to drive through this route. I have now managed to solve the problem by reducing the graphics settings, so I've cut the anti-aliasing setting down to a setting that's considerably lower than what I usually have it set to, so the graphical quality isn't quite so good. But it seems that I can now run through a full run of this route, which wasn't previously possible. I have also changed the track setting from the 3D track to the 2D track, simply because the 3D track only looks semi-good in the usual anti-aliasing setting that I use, but in this current anti-aliasing setting the 3D track looks pretty bad actually, and it's constantly shimmering and flickering at you, something which I find quite irritating to watch when driving along. You may notice that the train bounces around quite a lot on this route. Unfortunately, a lot of the track work really needs updating, so it's a bit violent on the train. And in real life, I think if you travelled over some of this track with the way it throws the train about, the train might not actually stay on the track if it was in this condition. We're now coming up on Cramlington Station. At Cramlington Station we have 25 miles to go to our next stop. I will say that the Class 91, which I'm currently driving, is actually my favourite British locomotive, if not my favourite train overall, the Class 91 set with the Mark IV coaches plus the Mark IV DVT on the rear. just because I have so many childhood memories of both seeing this train and riding on it. Because I'm originally from Lincoln, whenever we went away we usually went by train, which meant a journey along the East Coast Main Line. And so I clearly remember seeing intercity HSTs and intercity Class 91s storming through Newark Northgate Station at speed. And I also remember riding on these trains, particularly after we moved to the south, and then we used to go on holiday to visit family up in Lincoln. So we used to always go by train, and it always involved a journey along the East Coast Main Line between at least London and Peterborough, and often London and Newark Northgate. And so yeah, the Class 91s really are my favourite locos overall. I really enjoy riding behind them, and I think it will be a sad day when they eventually leave the East Coast Main Line. I'm not sure exactly when that will be, but I know that with the new trains that are on order, it probably won't be so long into the future now before the Class 91s cease to be used on East Coast Main Line services. What I'm looking out for now is the Morpeth board for the curve at Morpeth, where there will be a speed limit reduction down to 50 miles per hour. The curve at Morpeth is actually where the Morpeth board gets its name, so the Morpeth board is simply an advanced speed limit warning board. It's just because with the sharp curve here there have been a number of derailments over the years due to overspeeding, and so as a result they decided to bring in an advanced speed limit warning board, and they nicknamed it after that curve at Morpeth, which is quite infamous for the number of derailments due to speeding. So just past the 50 mile per hour Morpeth board now. So I've just cut off the power to allow the train to coast, and I'm going to apply the brakes up to step 4 as we reach the end of this left hand curve here. So I've now made a step 4 brake application, which should bring our speed down quite nicely. I will go up to step 5 if necessary as we get closer to the 50 mile per hour speed restriction. The 50 mile per hour speed restriction is coming up just ahead, so I am now increasing to step 5 braking, which should bring us down to 50 just in time. So we're now down to 50 miles per hour, just in time for passing the 50 board. Now just going to increase the power slightly and put the speed set up to 50 miles per hour, just to ensure that we don't break the speed limit around this curve. At this point on the HUD, for some reason, the speed limit actually jumps and shows that it's gone up to 125 miles per hour, but I assure you that that is not accurate, as you would never want to travel around this curve at 125 because you would certainly derail your train. We're now passing through Morpeth Station, and just after the station platform here, the speed limit then goes up to 70 miles per hour, and we can accelerate towards that as we reach a footbridge which is coming up, which you can see just ahead. So now we've reached the footbridge. I've just increased the speed set to 70, and I'm just going to increase the power to bring up our acceleration rate a bit. The next speed change will be an increase in the speed limit to 80 miles per hour, which will be coming up very shortly. We're now passing the 80 mile per hour speed board, so I'm now going to increase the speed set to 80, as we were only doing around 62 as we passed that board. The next speed limit change will be an increase in the speed limit to 105 miles per hour, shortly followed by a further increase to 110 miles per hour. We're now passing the 105 mile per hour speed board, so I'm just going to increase the speed set now to 110, which should hold us at a speed of around 105 miles per hour. We're now coming up on Pegswood Station. We're now passing the 110 mile per hour speed board, so I've just increased the speed set by 5 miles per hour, once again to 115, which should hold us at a speed of around 109. The next landmark that I'm looking out for along here is a junction, and at that junction we've then got 1.5 miles to go to an upcoming 105 mile per hour speed limit, and then a further reduction down to 100 miles per hour shortly after that. We're now crossing the junction, which marks 1.5 miles to the upcoming 105 mile per hour speed limit, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to idle the power at the next signal, which is around 2/3 of a mile from the 105 limit, and then at that point the train should coast down to 105 in time, and then I'm just going to leave the power off as the 105 speed board is around 3/4 of a mile from an upcoming 100 speed board. And so if we just coast from this next signal coming up, we should be able to coast all of the way down to 100 without needing to use the brakes. So I've just idled the power as we cross the AWS ramp there. I'm just going to keep an eye on our speed and ensure that we are coasting down in time. So we're now passing the 105 mile per hour Morpeth board. And as you can see, we're down to 105 in time for passing the 105 speed board. I'm just allowing the train to continue to coast down in speed now. We're just coming up on the 100 mile per hour Morpeth board warning now. And we are now down to 100 in time for the 100 board there. We're now passing through Widrington Station with 11.5 miles to go to our next stop. The next speed change will be an increase in the speed limit once again to 110 miles per hour. So at this point, notice I haven't changed the speed set, I'm just putting the power in a low setting, and I'm allowing the train to cruise at around 100. So we're now passing the 110 mile per hour speed board. At this point I'm now going to increase the power once again to accelerate up towards that. We're now passing Chevington Loops. What I'm looking out for next is the next station we pass through, which is Acklington, and at Acklington station we've then got 6.5 miles to go to our stop and 1.5 miles to go to an upcoming 85 mile per hour speed limit. We're now passing through Acklington station, so as I said, we've now got 6.5 miles to go to our stop and 1.5 miles to an upcoming 85 limit. The next signal we pass is 1 mile from the 85 mile per hour speed limit, and at this next signal just here I'm going to idle the power and allow the train to coast, and then going to apply the brakes for the upcoming 85 limit as we pass the 85 Morpeth board, which is just coming up now. At that point I'm then going to make a step 3 brake application. So we're now down to 85 miles per hour and we're just passing the 85 board just here. Just increased the speed set and I've just increased it up to 90, as at this point it's not completely accurate and will keep us at a speed lower than the speed limit. The speed limit here is now going up to 110 miles per hour, so I've once again increased the speed set to 115 and I've now applied full power, as we could accelerate once we passed under the overbridge shortly after the 110 board. What I'm looking out for next is a junction. Just after that junction will be a warning for an upcoming 95 mile per hour speed limit. However, I'm actually going to be applying the brakes for our stop at this junction, and I'm going to initially make a step 5 brake application, reducing to step 4 and then reducing further as we get closer to Almouth station. So at the junction we've then got around 1.25 miles to go to our stop. I believe that the junction which I'm looking out for actually comes up on us just after this left-hand curve here, and so I'm going to cut the power to idle just as we reach the end of this left-hand curve. We're just reaching the end of the curve now. The power is now in idle. You can see the junction just coming up, so I'm now making a brake application up to step 5, which should bring our speed down nicely, possibly slightly too quickly. But yesterday when I tried a step 4 brake application in the same place, I actually found that I wasn't slowing down quick enough and had to increase the brakes as we got closer to the station. So I am now reducing the braking to step 4, as I think we may be slowing down slightly too quickly now. I'm aiming to enter the platform at no faster than around 35 miles per hour. Indeed, we are still slowing down a bit too quick. So just reduce the braking right back to step 1, just so that we've still got some brake force. And I'll increase the braking now just as we approach the platform. But we're going to enter the platform just around 30 miles per hour, and we do need to stop right at the end of the platform. So I've just been fanning the brakes between steps 2 and 3 there. I'm now holding it in step 3, just to ensure that we are approaching the end of the platform slow enough. I'm aiming to stop with the signal just in the very left-hand side of the screen there. Here we are, arrival at Alnmouth. Departing Alnmouth, the starting speed limit is 85 miles per hour, as the limit dropped to 85 just shortly before the station here, and we've got just over 32 miles to go to our next stop, which is Berwick-upon-Tweed. At this point I am now in full power to accelerate up towards 85 miles per hour. The next speed change will be an increase in the speed limit to 95 miles per hour, and then an increase further to 120, before finally going up to 125 miles per hour, which is of course the maximum speed for both this train and for this route. We're now passing the 95 mile per hour speed board, so I'm just increasing the speed set here to 100, just to maintain this at a speed of around 95. Although of course I am now looking out for the next speed board, which increases the speed limit further to 120 miles per hour. We're now passing the 120 speed board, so I'll put the speed set up to 125, and then as we pass the 125 speed board, I will then set the speed set to 130. Now a speed set of 130 will actually hold us at a speed of 122, which will be okay, as those extra 3 miles per hour up to 125 will make very little difference to the time which it takes to get to our next stop. We're now passing the 125 speed board, so I've just increased the speed set now to 130. The next thing that I'm looking out for is a Morpeth board warning us of an upcoming 110 mile per hour speed limit. That Morpeth board is half a mile from the limit itself. Just to say, it's not this Morpeth board because this is a directional board for a 40 limit, which is going across a junction to the right. But yeah, the Morpeth board I'm looking out for is half a mile from the speed limit itself, and so as we pass that Morpeth board, I'm then going to idle the power and apply the brakes up to step 3 to ensure that we do slow down to 110 in time. I am planning that the next video after this one will hopefully be a Class 90 train guide. The Class 90 is one of my favourite locomotives in Train Simulator, and Armstrong Powerhouse and Wagons did an excellent job on that loco. And so I just really wanted to get a train guide done on it just because it's one of my favourites. And I think that it would be quite an interesting loco to cover with a great variety of liveries in a train guide style video. So this will be my first train guide I've done in a good few months now. I think the last one was the Class 50 back in the summer, in fact, so I want to try and get this done. I'm hopefully going to get another couple of train guides done in January, as well as hopefully a scenario building guide or scenario building tutorial, which I'm hoping to make in 3 parts, and that's something else that I'm hoping to cover in January. I think that would be really helpful. It's certainly one of the most requested videos that I make. A scenario creation tutorial, as so many people really don't seem to know how to use the scenario editor, and that's not necessarily their fault because the instructions are really unclear on how to use the scenario editor within Train Simulator. So we just passed the 110 Morpeth board. I've now made a step 3 brake application just to bring our speed down to 110 in time, and we're now down to 110 just as we pass the 110 speed board there. In fact, we may have entered the 110 zone slightly fast, at maybe 111 miles per hour. I'm not sure how strict they are on speed limits in real life. Certainly I don't think the 1 mile per hour will have made much of a difference at all. The speed limit will shortly be going back up to 125 miles per hour, so I'm just looking out for the 125 boards now. Looks like we've just reached them here, so I'm just going to increase the speed set back to 130, and we can accelerate just as we reach the rear of those signals there that we just passed. So in addition to these tutorials and guides which I've mentioned, I'm also hoping to get a good number of more route learning videos made between now and when I go back to uni in February, when then I'm going to have to again reduce the number of videos I'm making. I always aim for 1 a week, but I can never guarantee that because of how busy university keeps you. But I will still have a target of 1 video a week at that point. But between now and then, it's open season, and I'm just trying to get as many videos made as I can. So there will be some more route learning videos to come, British, American and German. In fact, I've just recently invested in the Steam sale in 4 new German locos, which is helping me with scenarios, so I can now choose a wider variety of scenarios on Steam Workshop. A friend of mine also bought me another German loco on top of that, so I've got 5 new German locos. And I've also bought the new Semmeringbahn add-on, so I'm hoping to cover a video on that in the very near future. That may be the next route learning video I cover, but I can't be certain on that. So we just passed through Chat Hill Station, and at that point we had 21 miles to go to Berwick-upon-Tweed, and 1.5 miles to go to an upcoming speed reduction down to 110 miles per hour, which is closely followed by a 105 mile per hour speed restriction. So I've now idled the power at this point, and I'm going to apply the brakes as we pass the 105 mile per hour Morpeth board. So I've now made a step 3 brake application to bring our speed down. I'm going to continue to brake until we're doing 105. So So we're now in fact doing around 102. We just passed the 105 border, now the speed limit has gone immediately back up to 110 miles per hour. So I'm increasing the power now. And I've also had to put the speed set back on up to 115. The speed limit is now going back up to 125 miles per hour, so I've once again increased the speed set to 130. I also plan on one more route guide before I go back to university in February. With the amount of time that route guides take to put together, it's actually going to be that I can only really make them when it's not term time at university. So the next route guide I plan on making is going to be on the London to Brighton route, which is going to be the biggest, most ambitious project I've done yet. There's going to be an awful lot to research. An awful lot of camera shots to get on the route, and also an awful lot of setting up to do. So you see a good number of trains passing in the correct locations, so that it really feels like that I'm recording a railway and I'm not just recording some static screenshots of the route. I do keep being asked at the minute about US signalling guide, and yes, I do still plan on making one. It's going to take an awful lot of work to put together, with research and covering different signalling systems which are to be found, should I say, on different routes within the USA. So it's going to be quite a challenge, and that's why I haven't made it yet, and I'm not exactly sure when it will get made. But I'd just like to say, rest assured that it will get made at some point in the future. We're now passing Crag Mill loops, and at this point we've got around 15 miles to go to our stop. We've now got some long signal sections as much as 1 3/4 miles apart. And so after the second signal after the loops that we've just passed, we've then got to start worrying about a speed limit reduction down to 115 miles per hour, which will be just after the third signal after the loops that we've just passed. There will be a warning for that 115 limit, which will be 3/4 of a mile from the limit itself. I will idle the power at that point and then brake lightly at the AWS ramp just before that third signal, if necessary. We're now passing the first signal after Crag Mill loops. We're now coming up on the second signal after Crag Mill loops, so it's around the area of the next signal where the speed limit drops to 115, and I'm now looking out for the Morpeth board for the 115 limit. You can just see the triangular Morpeth board coming up now, so at this point I've cut off the power to allow the train to coast, and as I said, I will apply the brakes likely at the next AWS ramp just before the signal if necessary, to ensure that we do slow down in time. You can see the signal coming up now, so I am going to apply the brakes. I've made now a step 3 brake application. Now I can release the brakes as we are down to 115, and I need to increase the speed set now up to 120 to roughly hold us at this speed. The speed limit will shortly be going back up to 125 miles per hour, and at that point we will have just over 8 miles to go to our stop. The speed limit's now gone back up to 125, so I've just increased the speed set once again to 130. At this point we've now got 8 miles to go roughly to our stop. Very shortly we're going to start running alongside the North Sea, which will be on the right hand side of us. So the next thing that I'm looking out for now is a Morpeth board along here, which should read 115 but actually reads 125, our current speed limit. And at that Morpeth board we've then got half a mile to go to a speed limit drop to 115. But then immediately after the 115 board, the speed limit will drop further to 100 miles per hour, and this 100 limit is not marked on the HUD. Once we've passed the 115 board and we've slowed down to 100 miles per hour, the speed limit will then shortly be dropping further to 95 and then 90 miles per hour. And again, the 90 mile per hour speed limit is also not marked on the HUD. So we are now running alongside the North Sea there, which I think is actually a very scenic section of the route here. And we've just passed the Morpeth board, which says 125, which should technically say 115, though I have actually applied the brakes up to step 4 at this point to ensure that we're actually down to 100 in time for passing the 115 speed board. We've now got a further warning for a reduction down to 95 miles per hour. And so I'm releasing the brakes here at this point, just cruising at just above 95, and then we've got a further warning for a reduction down to 75 miles per hour. As we pass the 95 board, I'm now going to apply the brakes just to reduce our speed to 90 for the unmarked 90 mile per hour speed section. Now I'm going to allow the train to coast at 90 until we reach the next signal, at which point I would then be braking for the 75 limit coming up. However, the signal here, as you can see, is actually a single yellow aspect, which means I now need to apply the brakes, assuming that the next signal is displaying a red aspect until I can see otherwise. I'm not actually certain of the exact position of the signal up ahead, so I've initially made a step 5 brake application, which I will reduce as we get closer to the signal. So we've just passed the 75 mile per hour speed board. and then the speed limit is also almost immediately dropping further to 70 miles per hour. Again, I'm not sure that that limit is marked on the HUD. So I have now reduced the braking, as we are slowing down a bit too early at this point, but we are now also going slow enough to be able to stop at the signal. In fact, the signal's coming up quicker than I realised just there, so I've had to go straight back up to, in fact, full service braking, as it was on a blind bend and I didn't realise it would be coming up at that point. I do think that we are going to slow down quick enough here to stop at the signal. So I should have actually approached that signal a bit slower. Of course, in real life, with my route knowledge, I would have known how far apart those signals are. Just applied a slight bit of power to try and bring us closer to the signal. Unfortunately, it caused the loco to jump slightly just there. So yes, what I've done is I've actually put a slightly delayed Voyager in front of us, just to add a bit of variety to the signals here. So the Voyager is currently in the platform at Berwick-upon-Tweed. As you can see, the signal here has now cleared to a single yellow aspect, and so I am now cleared all of the way into the platform at Berwick-upon-Tweed station. The speed limit here is 70, so I'm setting the speed set to 70, but there's no way we're going to be able to get to that before I have to start slowing down for our stop. I believe that the bridge that we're now about to cross is the Royal Border Bridge here at Berwick. Berwick-upon-Tweed station is just at the other end of this bridge, so I'm going to accelerate to around 40 miles per hour or so, before then idling the power and allowing the train to coast towards our stop. You can see we're doing just above 40 now, so at this point I am now idling the power. And we're just going to coast towards the station, which you can see coming up just ahead. I'm going to brake to enter the platform at no faster than around 30 miles per hour. So I'm just going to apply some light braking now to bring our speed off. So I'm in a step 3 brake application here. Now, in fact, I'm going to increase that now to step 4, in fact step 5. I thought we were going to slow down quicker than we actually were. And now I've cut the braking back to step 3 as we travel through the platform here. Again, here at Berwick-upon-Tweed, we do need to stop at the end of the platform. And so we should now be stopping in about the right place. Departing Berwick-upon-Tweed, the starting speed limit is 75 miles per hour, so I'm just going to increase the speed set to that now. And we've got just under 28.5 miles to go to our next stop, which is Dunbar. So as you probably noticed there, as I start with this locomotive, I gradually increase the power, and I normally take the locomotive up to full power by the time that we're doing around 10 miles per hour. The next speed change I'm looking out for is an increase in the speed limit to 95 miles per hour. But then the speed limit will be dropping down to 90 just around a mile after that. So I'm not actually going to be accelerating up to 95, but only 90 miles per hour at that point. We're now passing the 95 mph speed board. As I've already said, that is only a mile from the upcoming 90 speed limit, so we're not going to accelerate to anything above 90. Though in all honesty, I'm not even sure we'll get to 90 by the time we reach the 90 mph speed board. We're now passing the 90 mph speed board, and so the next thing I'm now looking out for is an increase in the speed limit back up to 95 miles per hour. At this point I've got the speed set to 95 because otherwise we'll be probably stuck at closer to 85 miles per hour. However, the train will still go over the speed limit if I leave it in full power, so I'm now cutting the loco back to around half power, which should hopefully keep us below the 90 speed limit. We're now passing the 95 speed board, so I've just increased the speed set to 100, and I'm going back up to full power to bring us up towards 95, and then as we reach 95 I'm going to cut back to around half power again to try and maintain the speed. The next landmark that I'm looking out for is a radio mast on the right hand side. At that radio mast we've then got 1.5 miles to go to an upcoming 80 mph speed restriction, and the 80 mph limit does not have a Morpeth board warning. So I do have to be extra careful with looking out for landmarks along here, so I know the correct place to brake for the 80 limit. Just cutting the power back down slightly more as it looked like we may be about to accelerate above 95. I just want to ensure that that doesn't happen along here. You can now see the radio mast on the right hand side here which we're passing, marking 1.5 miles from the upcoming 80 mph speed restriction. So we've now got one more signal between here and the speed restriction, and then a left curve, a fairly sharp left curve, and the limit actually drops to 80 at the end of that left curve. So I'm going to apply the brakes as we enter the curve around steps 3 or 4, and that should bring our speed down about right for the 80 speed limit. So at this signal just here I'm now going to idle the power just to allow us to coast. I'm now going to make a light brake application. I'm actually starting at step 2 here and now going up to step 3 as we round this curve. I think we might be slowing down slightly too early, but it's better to slow down too early than too late, especially as you saw at the signal I was approaching just before Berwick-upon-Tweed station there. Had I realised that the red signal was so close to the single yellow, I wouldn't have reduced the braking how I did, as I thought I would still have room to stop okay. But as soon as I saw that red signal and went up to full service braking, at least I was still able to stop in time. Looks like we just exceeded 80 slightly there, so I just cut the power back. I put the speed set now to 80 miles per hour. What I'm looking out for now is an increase in the speed limits back up to 95 miles per hour, and as we reach that increase in the speed limit, we've then got around 20 miles to go to Dunbar station. So we've just reached the 95 board now. We've got 20 miles to go to Dunbar station. I'm going to start accelerating about halfway between the signal just after the board and this overbridge just here. So we are now accelerating back up towards 95 miles per hour. What I'm looking out for next is some crossover points. At the crossover points, we've then got 1 3/4 miles to go to an upcoming 90 mile per hour speed limit. Just cutting the power back a bit now as the speed set is at 100. I do want to make sure that we don't exceed 95. We've now reached the crossover points here, which means 1 3/4 miles to go to the upcoming 90 mile per hour speed limit. I'm going to idle the power at the second signal after the crossovers, and then I'm going to brake step 1 just before the next overbridge to ensure that we are down to 90 miles per hour. So the signal coming up just here now is the first signal after the crossovers. I'm looking out for the second signal, and then at that point I'm going to idle the power. We're just coming up on the second signal now. So at this point I'm now idling the power, and I'm going to make a step 1 brake application just before this overbridge you can see coming up now. We're now in step 1 of braking, and we're now down to 90 miles per hour, just in time for the 90 speed board there, just increasing the speed set now up to 95, just to try and maintain us at around this speed, so speed set of 95. And a low power setting should do it here. So I'm now looking for the second signal after the 90 limit. We've just passed the first signal, and so the second signal will be coming up shortly, and we're going to, that's now then 3/4 of a mile from an upcoming 85 speed limit, and we're also going to be going uphill at 1 138, which will aid in our deceleration for the upcoming 85 speed limit. So we're now coming up on the second signal just here. I'm going to idle the power in a moment, and the train will just coast down to 85 at this point. So we have now slowed down to 85 in time for passing the 85 speed board here. However, the 85 board is only just over 3/4 of a mile from an upcoming 75 limit. So I'm continuing to coast down towards 75. I'm going to apply the brakes lightly just before the end of this right hand curve here to slow down for the 75 limit. So just reaching the end now. I've now made a step 2 brake application, which should bring our speed down to 75 quite nicely. In fact, maybe slightly too early there, so I'll just cut back to step 1 of braking. And we're now doing 75, so I'll increase the speed set to 75 and apply power to ensure that we maintain this speed. We've now got 13.5 miles to go to Dunbar. Here we've just crossed an AWS ramp for a completely invisible signal. As you should have noticed, there was absolutely no signal there, so I'm not sure why there's an AWS ramp being placed. Maybe the signal was missed out or something. I'm not entirely certain, but certainly there either should be a signal there with the ramp, or the ramp shouldn't be there at all. We're now passing Grant's House loops, and I need to idle the power for an upcoming 70 mph speed limit as we reach the end of these loops here. So we're just reaching the end of the loops now. At this point I'm now going to idle the power, and I will apply the brakes lightly if necessary as I see the upcoming 70 mph speed board, just to ensure that we have slowed down to 70 in time for the limit. Just applied a very light step 1 brake application to ensure that we were down to 70. So the speed limit is now 70 mph, and I put the speed set at 70 to roughly hold us at that speed. We are going downhill at present, so in fact I'm now going to idle the power and allow the train to coast. The speed set will now use the brakes to maintain us at this speed. The speed limit is now going up further to 85 mph. Can accelerate shortly after that bridge there. I'm not going to give us any power at this point due to the downhill gradient, so I've simply increased the speed set and I'm allowing the train to coast up towards 85. We are now going down up 1 in 97. The speed limit is now going up further to 90 mph as we're not accelerating very quickly with the higher increase in the speed limit, and now increasing the power so that we can accelerate up towards 90. There will be an overbridge coming up shortly with walls on either side of the track. In fact, this might be the overbridge coming up now. No, it isn't. The walls aren't there on this overbridge. But certainly there will be an overbridge coming up shortly with walls on either side of the track. And at that overbridge we've got around a mile to go to a speed limit reduction down to 85 mph. And so what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be braking just around the area of the next signal. A step 1 brake application. So here we are, we're just passing the bridge now with the walls on either side which I mentioned. And so I'm now looking out for the next signal. Just before we get to the next signal I'm going to idle the power. Then I'm going to make a step 1 brake application to make sure that we do slow down in time for the 85 limit. We're just coming up on the signal now, so I've now made a step 1 brake application. That should bring us down to 85 in time, though I will increase the braking if required. indeed, we are now down to 85 miles per hour. I've changed the speed set to 85, and as you can see we're now passing the 85 speed board, and then immediately afterwards the speed limit going back up to 90 miles per hour, and we're able to accelerate at the rear of those signals just there. So I've just increased the speed set now, initially up to 95, just to allow us to accelerate a bit quicker, and I'll just use a low power setting once we've reached 95. The speed limit is now going up further to 105 miles per hour. So I'm now increasing the speed set to 110 and going up to full power to accelerate up towards that. The speed limit is now going up further to 125 miles per hour. So I've now increased the speed set to 130 so that we can accelerate up to 122. What I'm looking out for next is a siding on the right hand side, which will be 1¼ miles from a 105 mile per hour speed limit. I believe that is the siding on the right hand side which I mentioned, so at this point I am now going to idle the power and allow the train to coast. What I'm looking out for now is an underbridge with a signal right by it, or should I say the rear of some signals right by it, and then at that point I'm going to apply the brakes to ensure that we have slowed down to 105 in time. We're just crossing the underbridge with the rear of the signal there, so I've now applied the brakes to ensure that we slow to 105. I've gone up as high as step 4 on the braking there, and we've just slowed to 105 in time. We've now got a flashing double yellow signal because we will shortly be turning off into Dunbar station, and so at this point I'm just going to allow the train to continue to coast at around 100 miles per hour until we reach the flashing single yellow signal, at which point I then will start applying the brakes. The speed limit will be dropping to 50 miles per hour just shortly after the next signal after the flashing single yellow, and it will be dropping to 40 miles per hour as we cross tracks. What's unique about the approach to Dunbar is the way in which we actually have to cross onto the wrong track to our right hand side for the approach to the station. We actually have to run on the wrong line for a minute or two before arriving at Dunbar station. So I've now got the brakes in a step 4 brake application, which is bringing our speed down nicely. In fact, I'm going to reduce the braking slightly as we may be slowing down slightly too early, though I will increase the braking as we get closer to the next signal if required. You can now see the next signal coming up, so I've gone back up to step 4 of braking. I want to slow down to 50 by the point at which I've reached this signal. The 50 mile per hour speed restriction just after the signal is actually not marked on the HUD, which is something else to point out, so it's something that you have to know about to ensure that you don't get any speed limit penalties on this route. And I've just braked down to 40 miles per hour for crossing the tracks here onto the wrong line. And now that I've done that, I'm just going to allow the train to coast into Dunbar station. There are no further speed changes, and although we just had a solid single yellow signal, in fact there are no signals until the end of the platform at Dunbar station. You can now see the platform just coming up. In fact, Dunbar has just one single platform, which is on this side, which is why we actually have to cross over tracks. I've just slowed down to ensure we don't enter the platform any faster than around 30 here. I'm aiming to stop once again at the end of the platform. As you can see, I'm just fanning the brakes here so I can try and come to a controlled stop. Now doing 10 miles per hour, which is a good speed. I'm now in a step 1 brake application to gradually bring our speed off, increasing to step 4 as we get closer to the end of the platform, and then back to step 2 for a smooth stop. So here we are, arrival at Dunbar. Departing Dunbar, the starting speed limit is 40 miles per hour, and we've got just under 29 miles to go to our next and final stop, which is Edinburgh Waverley. So now for another short distance, we're going to be running on the wrong track just here. Well, I say wrong track, of course it is bi-directional, but normally you would drive on the left in the UK, so it certainly has the appearance of being the wrong track. And so we're now stuck at 40 miles per hour until we've crossed back over onto the other line, at which point the speed limit will then be going up to 110 miles per hour. So we're now crossing the junction onto the other track just here. You can see that there is a 110 mile per hour speed board, and we can accelerate towards the 110 limit as we reach the next AWS ramp, which is just coming up. As we've now crossed the AWS ramp, I am now increasing the speed set to 115 miles per hour. What I'm looking out for next along here is a long footbridge, and then after that long footbridge there will be a signal, and at that signal we've then got 3/4 of a mile to go to an upcoming 100 mile per hour speed limit, and so I will be idling the power at that point. I'd just like to address another couple of frequently asked questions. One of them is in regards to live streaming and whether I still plan on doing it or when it may happen. And my answer to that is yes, I do still plan on doing it, but I can't be sure when it will happen, as I need to do a fair bit more setting up. I did set up ready to do it on my old PC, but in the end I didn't actually get to do it before I got the new machine, so I need to completely set everything up again. But in addition to that, it's just a case of finding the time and knowing when I will have the time to do it. And so what I'm looking to do is I'm looking to start live streaming probably next summer, in addition to doing live streaming also in the summer. So once I've broken up from university and I've passed through the exam period, I've got 3 months spare, so I'm hoping during those 3 months I can then do some live streaming, and at that point is the point I'd also like to start looking at other train related games that I can cover on this channel. I've got quite a few ideas now with regards to covering other train related games. It's just a case of working out how to execute those ideas in an interesting, informative and entertaining way. So once I've been able to do that and really plan it out, then I will start covering videos in some other games too. Of course, next summer I am planning indeed still on going to Chicago, and that will hopefully be in June, towards the end of June, just after the exam period has finished at university, and I'm planning on staying there for 2 weeks. I'll be staying with a friend. I'm hoping to do some train related things while I'm there, so I'll get to see some trains in the USA and hopefully get to ride on a couple as well, so that's something I really am looking forward to. We're just coming up on the long footbridge now, which I mentioned. And so at the signal just after this footbridge, I am then going to idle the power. Just reached the signal now. I have now idled the power. We should be able to coast down to 100, but I will apply the brakes lightly if necessary to ensure that we do slow to 100 in time. The speed limit is dropping to 100 miles per hour around the area of the next signal. I just applied some light braking. I may have entered the 100 zone slightly quick there, possibly 101 or 102 miles per hour. Should have braked probably just a second or two earlier, and then it all would have been okay. The next speed change will be an increase in the speed limit to 110 miles per hour, shortly followed by a further increase in the speed limit to 125 miles per hour. We're now passing the 110 speed board, so I am now going to increase the speed set to 115. And then in a short distance now, the speed limit will be going up further to 125 miles per hour. However, the 125 speed board is 1 3/4 miles from a speed limit reduction down to 115 miles per hour. So I see little point in accelerating above 115 along here. We're now passing the 125 speed board, so I'm just increasing the speed set to 120 to try and get us to maintain the speed close to 115 miles per hour. We're now passing the 115 mile per hour speed board. The North Berwick line is joining on the right hand side, and we're just coming up on Drem station. The speed limit is going up to 125 miles per hour immediately after the platform here at Drem. However, we're only 1 1/4 miles from a speed limit reduction down to 105 miles per hour, so I'm not going to accelerate towards 125 at this point. I'm now going to idle the power here. The signal is down to 105 at the second signal after the 125 speedboard. So here is the first signal. I'm going to apply the brakes lightly just before the second signal if necessary. So I'm now making a step 1 brake application, in fact just going up to step 2, and we are now down to 105. Just increase the speed set, just so that we can try and maintain this speed. In fact, I put the speed set at 110. The limit is now going back up to 110 miles per hour, so I've now increased the speed set to 115. We will shortly be coming up on Longnidry station, and at Longnidry we've then got 13¼ miles to go to Edinburgh. You can just see the platforms at Longnidry station just coming up now. The next speed change will be an increase in the speed limit to 125 miles per hour, and so I'm just looking out for that now. We're now passing the 125 mile per hour speedboard, so I'm putting the speed set up to 130. This is the last 125 mile per hour section we will encounter before arrival at Edinburgh Waverley station. We're now passing Prestonpan station, and at this point we've got 9½ miles to go. We're now passing through Wallingford Station with 7 3/4 miles to go to Edinburgh Waverley and 1.5 miles to go to an upcoming 95 mph speed limit. So I'm going to idle the power at this signal just coming up here. I'm going to brake about halfway between that signal and the upcoming overbridge you can see just ahead, up as hard as step 4. So I'm now making a step 4 brake application to bring our speed down to 95. The speed limit's now dropped to 95 and we managed to slow down just in time for that 95 board. The line to Miller Hill now diverges to the left, whereas we turn right here. And very shortly we will be going through another station at Musselburgh. And at Musselburgh Station we've then got 5 1/4 miles to go to Edinburgh and 1 3/4 miles to go to an upcoming 90 mph speed limit. So here's Musselburgh Station that we're passing through now, with 1 3/4 miles to go to an upcoming 90 mph speed limit. I am now looking out for a 90 mph warning board, and at that warning I will then idle the power and the train should be able to coast down to 90 mph in time. We've just reached the 90 mph speed restriction warning now, so I've just idled the power to allow the train to coast down to 90. The speed limit has now dropped to 90, in fact I think we may have entered the section at 91, again just 1 mile an hour over. We are now passing Edinburgh East Depot here, and coming up shortly will be Edinburgh's Craigentinny Depot, which I believe is the main maintenance depot in Edinburgh for Virgin Trains East Coast, which was previously East Coast Trains, National Express East Coast, GNER, and then before that Intercity. So we're now passing Craigentinny Depot. I'm just allowing the train to continue to coast here. We really don't need any power at this point. What I'm looking out for next is some diverging aspect signals. So there will be a flashing double yellow signal, which is 1.5 miles from a junction. We're just passing that now. So that's 1.5 miles from a junction where we need to turn off, just over 3/4 of a mile from an 85 speed limit, and 1 1/4 miles from a 70 mph speed limit, and finally 1.5 miles from a 40 mph speed limit. So I'm now looking out for a flashing single yellow signal at the flashing single yellow, and then going to start braking. So we're just passing that now. I'm making a step 3 brake application. I shouldn't need to brake too hard at this point, and that should bring our speed down quite nicely. As you can see, we're just passing the 85 board at 65 miles per hour. In fact, I'm going to release the braking slightly as we may be slowing down slightly too quickly here. I'm looking out now for the next signal, and the speed limit will be dropping to 40 miles per hour just after the next signal, which I believe I can see just coming up on the left hand side now. So I've now gone up to step 3 of braking at this point. The signal has now jumped up to green, indicating that we are cleared onto the opposite track for our approach to Edinburgh Waverley Station. A bit like at Dunbar here, we do actually have to do some wrong line running to get to the correct platform at Edinburgh Waverley. So I have probably slowed down slightly too early there, but the junction is coming up just now. You can see it just ahead. So I'm just going to allow the train to coast at 40 miles per hour at this point. We'll shortly be going through a tunnel before arriving at Edinburgh Waverley station. As we enter the tunnel, the speed limit remains at 40 miles per hour, though the speed limit drops to 20 miles per hour immediately as we leave the other end of this tunnel. So I'm now going to start braking to slow us down to 20. At the minute I'm just making a light brake application to bring our speed down gently, but will increase now as we get towards the end of the tunnel there. One of the things I have noticed with this tunnel is that the tunnel occlusion doesn't seem to have been included, so the track is awfully bright, certainly a lot brighter than it should be through here, which you shouldn't really be able to see the track hardly at all. So we are now down to 20 miles per hour, there are no more AWS ramps here. Edinburgh Waverley station is an area with no AWS at all. And we're currently going to be stopping in platform 2 here at Edinburgh Waverley, which means as we enter this platform we're stopping around halfway along before a signal and a set of points, as the platform here is divided into two, with platform 2 being at this end and platform 19 being just after the signal and the points in the middle of this platform. So I'm just coasting now into Edinburgh station. I'm looking out for the signal just ahead. It should technically be red, but for some reason in Train Simulator it's been setting it at a single yellow with a number 19 above it, indicating that I am cleared into platform 19. Yet if I was to actually drive into there, then it wouldn't allow me to open the doors very likely or complete the scenario. So this should now be about the right place to stop. Here we are, arrival at Edinburgh Waverley. So I'd just like to say thank you for watching this video. I really do hope that you have enjoyed it. Please don't forget that you can find me on Facebook for the latest updates, the link of which is in the description of this video. Once again, thank you for watching.